The air in the Municipal Auditorium was thick, vibrating with an almost unbearable anticipation. Thousands of voices hummed a low, excited drone that built into a crescendo of screams the moment the house lights dimmed. It was July 1970, and Elvis Presley was about to take the stage. Backstage. Elvis took a deep breath, the familiar scent of stale popcorn and nervous energy filling his lungs. He adjusted the collar of his dazzling white jumpsuit, adorned with intricate gold patterns that shimmered even in the dim light of the wings. His heart thrummed a familiar rhythm, a mix of excitement and the deep, abiding love he felt for his audience. This was his life, the stage, his home, and these screaming fans his family. He straightened his shoulders, a king preparing to meet his adoring subjects. "All right, big fella," his stage manager, Joe, clapped him on the shoulder. "They're ready for ya." Elvis gave a tight smile, a flicker of something profound in his blue eyes. He nodded, then strode out into the roaring darkness. The spotlight hit him, blinding him for a moment, but he was used to it. The screams intensified a wave of sound so powerful it felt like a physical force. He lifted a hand, a casual wave, and the noise somehow grew even louder. A tidal wave of adoration. He moved to the center microphone, its crown gleaming under the lights. The band, a powerhouse of musicians, launched into the opening chords of "That's All Right, Mama." The familiar bass line throbbed through the floor. The drums crashed and the guitars wailed. Elvis gripped the microphone, took another breath, and leaned in, ready to unleash his voice. "Well, that's all right, Mama. That's all right for you." His voice, a rich, powerful baritone, soared out, amplified, filling every corner of the vast arena. The crowd screamed, danced in their seats, held up signs. This was the magic, the connection, the reason he lived. He was lost in the moment, swaying, his hips moving in that famous electrifying way, sweat already beading on his brow, despite the cool blasts from the stage fans. He was midway through the first verse, his voice effortlessly hitting a high note when it happened. One moment his voice was booming, perfectly balanced with the band. The next, a sudden sharp crackle sliced through the sound system. It was brief, almost imperceptible to the screaming crowd, but Elvis felt it a tiny tremor through the mic stand. He frowned just for a second, but kept singing professional to his core. Then the crackle returned louder this time, followed by a sickening pop. A sudden, dead silence descended upon his voice. The band was still playing, oblivious for a split second, their instruments still screaming through the PA system. But Elvis's voice, which had just been filling the entire auditorium, was gone. The microphone was dead. Panic, cold and swift, shot through him. His eyes flickered to the side of the stage where the sound crew was already scrambling. A flurry of panicked gestures. The crowd, however, hadn't noticed yet. Their screams were so loud, the band so powerful, that the loss of his vocal amplification was momentarily masked. They were still cheering, still captivated by his movements, his presence. He tried the microphone again, tapping it gently, then fiercely. Nothing, not a whisper. He could hear the band blaring, the drums rattling his very bones, the bass line shaking the floor. But his own voice, the instrument that defined him, was locked inside him, unable to reach the crowd. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Stop the show. Signal for a new Mick. Walk off stage. The colonel would kill him. The fans would be disappointed. This was a disaster. A nightmare unfolding in real time. He could feel the eyes of thousands on him, the unspoken expectation, the unwavering faith. He had never stopped a show, not once, and he wasn't about to start now. His eyes swept over the sea of faces in the front rows, still cheering, still waiting for his voice to pierce through the musical din. He could see their mouths moving, shouting his name, singing along. But they couldn't hear him. Not really. Not the way they were supposed to. His bandmates, still playing, were starting to notice. Ronnie Tutt, his drummer, looked up, a puzzled expression on his face. James Burton, on lead guitar, leaned closer to his monitor, then looked at Elvis with a questioning gaze. They couldn't hear him either. How could they play if they couldn't hear their lead singer? A deep breath. This wasn't just about the equipment. This was about the music, about the connection. This was about Elvis Presley. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, his mind racing through options. He could wave his hand signal for the song to stop. He could point frantically to the mic. try to explain, but what good would that do? The song was still going, the momentum was there, then a defiant spark ignited within him. He wouldn't let a technical malfunction steal this moment from him or from his fans. He wouldn't let it silence him. He opened his eyes, fixed on the audience, and took the deepest breath he had ever taken. He didn't care that the microphone was dead. He didn't care that the band was too loud for him to hear his own voice properly. He had to sing, he would sing. With a powerful surge of will, he pushed his voice forward, not just from his diaphragm, but from the very depths of his soul. He projected not just to the first row, but to the very last seat in the highest tier. He didn't know if it would work, if anyone beyond the front few rows would hear him over the booming band and the lingering screams, but he had to try. He aimed his voice, a raw, unamplified roar, directly at the heart of the arena, ignoring the dead microphone clutched uselessly in his hand. "Well, that's all right, Mama, 'cause that's all right with me." His voice stripped bare of all electronic enhancement, cut through the din. It was a raw, primal sound, unlike anything anyone in that arena had ever heard from him before. It wasn't just singing, it was a pure, unadulterated force of nature. The sound, when it came, wasn't a roar in the traditional sense, or even a shout. It was something far more profound, something that resonated, not just in the ears, but deep within the chest. For those in the first few rows, it was a sudden, clear burst of sound that seemed to slice through the wall of instrumental music and crowd noise. For those further back, it was a subtle shift, a whisper that grew into an undeniable presence. Sarah Miller, a 16-year-old from downstate, had saved every penny from her waitressing job for this concert. She was in the 10th row, clutching a worn-out album cover, her throat raw from screaming. When the mic cut out, she hadn't noticed immediately. She was too lost in the spectacle of Elvis's movements, his incredible energy. But then as he launched into that line, something shifted. She had been yelling along a joyful noise among thousands, but suddenly she could hear him. Not through the speakers, not processed and polished, but raw, unfiltered. His voice, she swore, felt like it was coming directly from his lungs to her ears, bypassing all the technical wizardry. It was stronger, richer, more textured than anything she'd ever heard on a record. It had a physical presence, a warmth that seemed to ripple through the air. Around her, the screams began to falter. One by one, then, in small clusters, people lowered their hands, their mouths falling open, a ripple of confusion. Then, something else, a dawning understanding, spread through the crowd. The band was still playing loud and proud, but somehow Elvis was louder. His voice, unassisted, was somehow cutting through their amplified instruments. Further back in the cheaper seats, high in the nosebleed section, 70-year-old Martha Perkins leaned forward, her spectacles perched on her nose. She'd seen Elvis once before, years ago, but this was different. She had been enjoying the music, nodding her head, but finding the sheer volume of the amplified sound a bit much for her old ears. Now, though, a strange clarity had settled over the sound. It was still loud. Yes, but somehow less jarring. It felt natural. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening. She could still hear the band, but above them, below them, all around them, was a pure, unadulterated voice. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. It vibrated in the very air, a warmth against her skin. It was as if Elvis had stepped out of the sound system and directly into the room, singing just for her, just for each person there. Martha opened her eyes and saw it happening all around her. People were no longer screaming. They were still heads tilted, expressions a mixture of disbelief and awe. The arena, which moments ago had been a chaotic cacophony, was slowly, miraculously falling silent. Not entirely silent. The band was still roaring, but the human noise, the collective roar of thousands of fans, was dying down. On stage, Elvis kept singing. His eyes were open, now searching the crowd. He could feel it, a change, a tangible shift in the atmosphere. The screams had lessened, replaced by a deep, quiet hum of attention. He couldn't hear himself over the band, but he could feel the connection. A powerful current passing between him and the audience. He pushed harder, pouring every ounce of himself into the song. his voice a raw, magnificent instrument unleashed. His bandmates were catching on, too. James Burton, the legendary guitarist, glanced at Elvis, his eyes wide with amazement. He could feel the power of Elvis's unamplified voice vibrating through the stage floor. He adjusted his playing, instinctively softening his touch, pulling back just a fraction, letting Elvis's pure vocal power take center stage. Ronnie Tutt, the drummer, slowed his beat, his powerful fills becoming more nuanced, more responsive to the raw vocal instead of driving it. They were learning to follow, not a sound from a speaker, but the very essence of the man in front of them. Colonel Tom Parker, watching from the wings, had been furious. He had seen the sound crew scrambling, heard the crackle. "Get it fixed now," he had hissed, his face red. But then, as he watched, something impossible began to happen. The noise from the crowd, the incessant screaming was fading. He could hear Elvis, not through the speakers. No, the lights on the board were still dead. But he could hear him. A shiver ran down the colonel's spine. It wasn't the sort of sound you heard on the radio, or even live with a perfect sound system. This was something else. This was bigger, more real. It was the sound of a man's voice, pure and unadorned, filling a space meant for thousands. It defied logic. It defied physics. He saw people in the audience, usually so frantic and wild, sitting perfectly still, mesmerized. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others had their hands pressed to their mouths, as if to keep from making a sound that might break the spell. The roar of the crowd had transformed into a collective, breathless gasp. Elvis finished the song. "That's all right, Mama," his voice echoing in the sudden, profound silence that followed. The band faded out, instruments quieting, leaving only the reverberation of his final unamplified note hanging in the air. For a long moment there was no sound at all, no screams, no applause, not even a cough. Just the lingering hum of thousands of hearts beating as one. It was a silence so deep, so absolute, it was almost deafening. Then a single sob broke the stillness from somewhere in the middle of the crowd. It was quickly followed by another and another, until a wave of quiet, emotional sound rippled through the arena. No one was screaming, no one was clapping, yet they were just feeling. Elvis stood center stage, the dead microphone still clutched in his hand. He looked out at the silent, awestruck faces, his own breath catching in his throat. He had pushed his voice, pushed it further than he ever thought possible, and they had heard him. They had truly heard him. Connection was stronger, deeper, more palpable than any sound system could ever create. He slowly lowered the microphone, his eyes still sweeping the crowd. He saw the tears, the stunned expressions, the raw emotion. It wasn't the adulation he was used to. It was something far more profound. It was reverence. It was understanding. It was a shared moment of impossible beauty. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The air was still humming with the ghost of his voice, a silent promise. And in that moment, in that vast, suddenly intimate space, everyone knew they had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. Backstage, Colonel Parker was having a coronary, or at least he felt like it. His face, usually a picture of practiced calm or shrewd calculation, was now a mask of furious, beet-red panic. "What in the blazes happened?" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls of the backstage corridor. He pointed a stubby finger at a trembling sound engineer who was frantically yanking cables from a giant mixing board. "Get it fixed now. Do you understand? Every second that boy ain't amplified is money out of my pocket and a lawsuit waiting to happen." The engineer, a young man named Billy, looked up, his face pale with sweat. "Colonel, we're trying. It's a short in the main line, a total system failure. We're rerouting power, but it'll take a minute. It could take 10 minutes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes of Elvis Presley, the biggest star in the world, singing into a dead microphone. The thought made the colonel's stomach churn. This was a disaster of epic proportions. The fans would demand freecuns. The press would tear them apart. Elvis Presley, king of mime. He could already read the headlines. His meticulously crafted empire, felt like it was crumbling. But then a strange phenomenon began to filter back to him even through the backstage noise and his own internal rage. The screaming, it was dying down, not completely gone, but undeniably softer, replaced by a strange, almost reverent hush. He peered around the curtain, craning his neck to get a better look at the stage. He saw Elvis still singing, still performing, completely oblivious to the mix's failure, or perhaps utterly determined to ignore it. And he heard it. That voice, not the amplified boom, but a pure, unadulterated sound that seemed to carry through the very air, vibrating the floorboards beneath his feet. It was raw, powerful, and utterly captivating. He'd heard Elvis sing without a mic before in rehearsals and dressing rooms, but never like this. Never with this kind of effortless projection, this sheer force that somehow filled a building designed for thousands. It was beyond explanation. It was a miracle. And a miracle, the Colonel instantly recognized, could be even more valuable than a perfectly working sound system. His panic began to ebb, replaced by a different kind of calculation. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't a disaster. This was an opportunity. But first they had to keep it going on stage. The band was in a state of controlled chaos. Ronnie Tutt, the powerhouse drummer, had been the first to realize something was wrong. He relied on the monitors to hear Elvis's vocals, and suddenly they were gone. His eyes darted to James Burton, who was already looking at Elvis. Then back at Ronnie, a silent message passing between them. "What do we do then?" Elvis's voice cut through. Raw, pure, impossibly. Ronnie felt it more than heard it through the instruments, a vibration that went straight to his bones. It was a call to arms, a primal directive. Keep playing. Follow me. He adjusted his playing, pulling back on the power, trying to listen more intently to Elvis's visual cues. His body language. It was like playing without a net, relying solely on instinct and years of shared musical telepathy. He watched Elvis's lips, his chest movements, the subtle nods of his head. He matched his tempo, anticipated his phrasing, trying to create a softer, more dynamic bed for the unamplified voice. James Burton, the guitar wizard, felt the same shift. He'd played with Elvis for years, knew every nuance of his performance, but this was different. He instinctively turned down his own amp just a hair, then another. The sound of his guitar became less about brute force and more about texture, about weaving around Elvis's voice. He tried to hear the actual vocal, focusing on the pure sound emanating from the man rather than the monitor. It was a challenge, a fascinating, thrilling tightrope walk. He found himself playing with more restraint, more feeling, trying not to overpower the delicate, yet incredibly powerful, unamplified voice. They were no longer just a band playing a song. They were an ensemble reacting to a singular, almost mystical event. They were listening, truly listening, in a way they hadn't had to since they were kids practicing in garages, without the benefit of massive PA systems. Jerry Sheff, the bassist, felt it too. The thrum of Elvis's voice seemed to resonate through his bass, a palpable vibration. He simplified his lines, making them cleaner, more supportive, less busy. He watched Elvis's famous leg movements, his hip swivels, using them as cues for rhythm and emphasis. He realized that this was raw, primal music. It wasn't about flash. It was about the pure, unadulterated heart of the song. For the first time in a long time, playing with Elvis felt utterly spontaneous, totally unpredictable. There were no safety nets, just them and him and the incredible, impossible sound. Elvis, meanwhile, was completely in his element, yet acutely aware of the strange situation. Couldn't hear the band clearly, not over the roaring in his own ears from pushing his voice so hard. He was relying on the muscle memory of the song, the instinctual connection with his musicians. He saw their faces, their focused expressions, the subtle adjustments they were making. They were with him. They understood. He sang "Love Me Tender," a hushed, intimate ballad that usually filled the arena with a gentle swell of sound. Now, without the muck, his voice took on an ethereal quality. It was softer, yes, but held an incredible clarity. Each word perfectly articulated. Each note imbued with genuine, raw emotion. The audience was utterly spellbound. caught in the delicate web of his pure vocal. He moved through the song, his voice a balm, a whisper that somehow spoke volumes. The band played so softly, so beautifully, that they were barely there, like a ghostly accompaniment, allowing Elvis's voice to float, untethered, above the sea of silent faces. As the final note hung in the air, a profound stillness settled over the Municipal Auditorium. The silence was absolute, a heavy, reverent blanket, woven from awe and shared emotion. Backstage, Billy, the sound engineer, had just managed to re-establish a flickering connection to the main power line. He saw the lights on his board begin to glow faintly. He looked up, ready to shout the good news, but then he saw the Colonel's face. Colonel stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the stage, a strange, almost beatific smile spreading across his usually stern features. He wasn't yelling anymore, he was listening. And as Elvis finished, "Love Me Tender," to that profound, awestruck silence, the Colonel slowly, deliberately raised a hand to Billy, signaling him to stop. The sound engineer froze, his mouth agape. The Colonel, the man who lived for amplification and perfection, was telling him not to fix the mic. Colonel merely shook his head, a slight knowing smirk on his face. He gestured towards the stage, then to the silent, utterly captivated audience, he mouthed two words: let it be. Let the magic unfold. Elvis stood center stage, bathed in the blinding spotlight, the dead microphone hanging loosely in his hand. The silence was so profound it hummed. It wasn't the usual appreciative silence before a roar of applause. It was deeper, more spiritual. He could almost hear the collective breath of thousands of people holding steady, waiting. He looked out at them, He saw the wonder in their eyes, the genuine emotion on their faces. It wasn't just screaming fans anymore. It was an audience connected on a primal level. He had never felt such an intense, intimate bond with a crowd. Not even in his earliest, most raw performances, this was different. This was pure. He thought of the technical disaster, the Colonel's probable apoplexy, Then he remembered the feeling, the incredible surge of power as he had pushed his voice, the surprise when it had actually carried, and the silence, the beautiful, unforgettable silence that followed. He made a decision, a crazy one perhaps, but it felt right. He raised the microphone not to his lips, but as a symbolic gesture. He looked at Ronnie Tutt, the drummer, and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Ronnie, understanding, tapped out a quiet rhythm on his hi-hat. James Burton picked up a soft, melodic guitar line, almost like a whisper. Jerry Chef's bass provided a deep, grounding pulse. They launched into "Can't Help Falling in Love." This was Elvis's encore song, the one that always brought the house down, the one that sent everyone home with a warm glow. It was a song that demanded intimacy, a gentle lullaby, and tonight it would be delivered in its purest form. Elvis closed his eyes, drawing on every ounce of his vocal strength, every lesson learned over years of performing. He didn't just sing the words, he poured his heart into each syllable, letting the raw emotion of the lyrics resonate through his unamplified voice. Wise men say only fools rush. His voice, a tender caress, flowed through the arena. It was softer than before, yes, but it retained an astonishing clarity. Every inflection, every delicate vibrato, every nuanced breath was audible. It wasn't just a voice, it was a living, breathing entity that enveloped the audience. Sarah Miller, still wide-eyed in the 10th row, felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't expected this. She had expected a show, a spectacle. She hadn't expected her soul to be laid bare. She found herself swaying gently, her hands clasped over her heart, utterly lost in the moment. The girl next to her, who had been screaming nonstop, was now silently weeping, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Martha Perkins in the nosebleeds felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was like listening to a record, but better, so much better. It was like Elvis was right there in her living room, singing just for her. She had lived a long life, seen many things, But this, she knew, was a memory she would cherish until her dying day. The sheer, unadulterated beauty of it was almost too much to bear. The band was working in perfect harmony, a testament to their skill and their deep connection to their leader. They played with incredible restraint, their instruments muted, serving as a delicate, supportive background rather than a dominant force. James Burton's guitar lines were shimmering like moonlight on water. Ronnie Tutt's drums were barely there. Gentle taps and brushes, Jerry Scheff's bass provided a soft, rhythmic heartbeat. They were creating a sacred space for Elvis's voice to float and soar. Elvis moved slowly across the stage, no longer needing to use the microphone as a prop. He gestured with his hands, his eyes conveying all the passion he felt. He was performing for them, not just to the front rows, but to every single person. Could feel their attention, their unwavering gaze, their collective breath. "But I can't help falling in love with you." The tenderness in his voice was palpable. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was an offering. He sang the song as if it were a prayer, a confession, a declaration. The emotional depth was staggering backstage. Billy, the sound engineer, stood mesmerized. He had the mic fixed, the lights on the board glowed green, ready to go, but the colonel still hadn't given the signal. He was just standing there, arms crossed, a peculiar look on his face, a mix of awe, pride, and perhaps a dawning realization of the sheer magnitude of what was happening. Billy had never seen the colonel like this. He was usually all about business, contracts, profit. But now he seemed to be genuinely captivated by the raw artistry unfolding before him. The colonel wasn't thinking about money. Not right now. He was thinking about legend. He was thinking about the stories that would be told about this night. A faulty mic. A moment of weakness turned into a display of unimaginable power. This wasn't just a concert anymore. It was an event. It was history. Elvis hit the final note of "Can't Help Falling in Love," holding it, letting it reverberate through the silent arena. An impossibly pure sound. The band faded out, leaving only the ghost of his voice hanging in the air. A fragile, exquisite echo. The silence that followed was even more profound than before. It stretched long and deep, punctuated only by the soft sounds of emotional sniffles from the audience. No one wanted to break it. No one dared. It was a moment of shared communion, a collective breath held in reverence. Elvis opened his eyes. He looked out at the silent, tear-streaked faces, and a single genuine smile touched his lips. It wasn't the practiced, confident smile of a superstar. It was the humble, grateful smile of an artist who had just connected with his audience on a level he had never known was possible. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep respect, not just for the silence, but for the profound connection. He didn't speak. There were no words needed. The music had said it all, and then, softly at first, a ripple of applause began. It was gentle, almost hesitant, as if the audience was afraid of shattering the delicate spell, but it grew slowly, steadily into a warm, heartfelt ovation. It was applause born not of hype, but of pure, unadulterated appreciation. It was the sound of thousands of hearts overflowing. Elvis stood there, allowing the warmth of it to wash over him, a feeling far more satisfying than any deafening scream. He had faced a nightmare, a technical failure that should have ruined his show. Instead, it had revealed something extraordinary. It had revealed the true, unamplified power of his voice, and in doing so, it had revealed the true, unamplified connection between him and his fans. Tonight, they hadn't just seen Elvis Presley perform. They had felt him. They had truly heard him. And the memory would last a lifetime. As Elvis walked off stage for the planned intermission, the applause in the arena, though softer than usual, continued deep and resonant. It wasn't the wild, screaming adoration he was used to, but something quieter, more profound. Could feel it following him, a warm glow of genuine appreciation. The moment he stepped into the wings, the controlled chaos of backstage erupted around him. Roadies, stagehands, and sound engineers who had been frozen in place during his last unamplified song suddenly sprang into action. "Elvis, "Are you all right, Joe?" His stage manager rushed forward, a towel in his hand. He looked bewildered, his eyes darting between Elvis and the still-dead microphone. "The mic, it just died. We've got a major problem." Elvis merely nodded, taking the towel and wiping his brow. He felt exhausted, his throat a little raw from pushing his voice, but a strange, exhilarating energy coursed through him. "I know, Joe," he said, his voice a little hoarse, but a wide, almost incredulous smile touching his lips. "But they heard me, didn't they?" Joe stared at him, then back at the stage, then out towards the arena where the applause was still murmuring. "Heard you, Elvis. I don't know how, but you filled the whole damn place. I swear I thought you had a secret backup mic I didn't know about. It was incredible." Then, Colonel Parker appeared, pushing through the small crowd of crew members. His face, which had been a mask of fury just minutes ago, was now a curious blend of disbelief, shrewdness, and a flicker of genuine awe. He didn't shout, which was perhaps the most surprising thing of all. "Boy," the colonel said, his voice surprisingly soft for him. "What in tarnation was that?" Elvis shrugged, still smiling. The mic went out. "Colonel, I just kept singing." "Kept singing?" Parker snorted. "You didn't just keep singing, son, you did something I ain't never seen before. Not in all my years. You filled that place like a damn church choir, only louder." He shook his head, running a hand over his slicked back hair. "Billy," he'd barked at the sound engineer, who was still fumbling with cables. "Is it fixed?" Billy, startled, jumped. "Almost, Colonel. Just got to test the main line. A few more minutes." Parker looked from Billy to Elvis, then out towards the arena again. The applause was dying down now, but a buzz was starting to build, a low murmur of conversation unlike any he'd heard at a concert before. In the audience, the buzz was indeed growing into a roar of bewildered excitement. People were turning to each other, eyes wide, voices hushed, then rising in disbelief. "Did you hear that? How did he do that? The mic was dead. I saw him hit it. It was like he was right next to me. I swear I got goosebumps." Journalists, usually jaded and cynical, were scrambling. Richard Davies, a music critic for the local paper, had been idly scribbling notes about the opening acts, expecting another routine Elvis concert. When the mic cut out, he'd rolled his eyes, prepared to write about the technical glitches. But then that voice. He had sat bolt upright, pen forgotten, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was hearing. He had covered hundreds of concerts, knew all about amplification and sound systems. This defied everything. Tore a fresh page from his notebook and began to furiously write. Not about the show's problems, but about the impossible phenomena. Elvis Presley. Unplugged and unbelievable, he scrawled, then crossed out unbelievable and wrote divine. He knew he had just witnessed history. He had to capture it, convey it. Photographers, too. Many had been aiming their cameras at Elvis's dazzling movements, capturing the spectacle. But after the mic cut out, they noticed the crowd's reaction, the sudden, stunned silence, the collective awe. They started snapping shots of the audience, capturing the tear-streaked faces, the open mouths. They knew these reactions were as much a part of the story as Elvis himself. Outside the arena, the buzz was starting to spill over. People arriving late, or just passing by, noticed the unusual quiet emanating from the building, followed by a different kind of murmur. News reporters, usually waiting for post-show, comments were starting to receive frantic phone calls from their editors. Get down to the Municipal. Something wild is happening at the Elvis show. Back in Elvis's dressing room, the mood was a strange mix of relief, exhaustion, and exhilaration. Elvis sat on the couch sipping water, his jumpsuit unzipped a little at the collar. His bandmates were all there, shaking their heads in wonder. "Man," Elvis James Burton said, running a hand through his hair, "I swear I could feel your voice through the floor. I had to turn down my amp so I didn't drown you out, but it was like you were right there. I've never had to listen so hard. It was like playing in a jam session, just pure feel." Elvis smiled, It was something else, wasn't it? He looked at Joe. The stage manager, so is it fixed, Joe? Joe looked at the colonel, who was still standing by the door listening intently. Colonel looked back at Elvis, a shrewd glint in his eye. Son, the colonel said slowly, walking into the dressing room. Billy says he's got it running clean as a whistle. He paused, looking around the room, making eye contact with each band member. But tell me, fellas, did you ever hear anything like that before? The band members all shook their heads. No, Sir Jerry. Chef mumbled never. The colonel nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. Me neither, boys. Me neither. Folks came here tonight to see a show, to hear the king, and they got something more. They got a miracle. And miracles, son, don't need no amplification. Elvis stared at him, a sudden understanding dawning in his eyes. He knew what the colonel was suggesting. The colonel merely winked. Billy can have that mic working by the end of intermission, but for the second half, let's give them something to talk about for the rest of their lives. Let's give them the real Elvis. A thrill went through Elvis. It was unconventional, but it felt right. It felt honest. He looked at his band, who were also catching on expressions of surprise turning into excitement. You mean it, Colonel? Elvis asked, a grin spreading across his face. The colonel clapped him on the shoulder. Son, I mean it. Tonight we don't just sell tickets. Tonight we make history without a single working microphone. The buzz backstage intensified. But now it was a buzz of anticipation, not panic. The first half of the concert had been an unexpected disaster turned into a spontaneous miracle. The second half, it seemed, was about to become a legend. The intermission felt different. Usually it was a blur of hurried trips to the concession stands, excited chatter about the first half, and eager anticipation for the second. Tonight the air in the Municipal Auditorium hummed with a strange, almost sacred energy. People weren't just talking, they were whispering, recounting, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Conversations were punctuated by gasps of disbelief, wide eyes, and shared shivers. Sarah Miller and her friend Brenda were still in their seats, too stunned to move. Did that really happen? Brenda whispered, her voice hoarse. I thought I was dreaming. I swear I could hear every single word. Sarah nodded, a lump in her throat. Me too. It was like he was singing just to me. It wasn't loud like the records, but it was so clear, so real. She pressed a hand to her chest. Across the arena, Martha Perkins watched the younger fans, usually so boisterous, now sitting quietly. Many wiping away tears, she smiled softly. See, Ethel, she murmured to her friend, I told you there was more to him than just the hip shaking. That boy's got a voice that could move mountains. Ethel, who had initially been skeptical about seeing Elvis, just nodded, her eyes still misty. I've never heard anything like it, never. It was like a spiritual experience. The transformation in the audience was palpable. The initial shock had given way to awe, then to a quiet, profound appreciation. The frantic screaming that often characterized Elvis concerts had been replaced by a deep respect, an almost reverent silence when he sang. People had stopped thinking about the spectacle and started focusing solely on the pure, unadulterated voice. Even the ushers and security guards, usually preoccupied with crowd control, found themselves standing still, leaning against walls, listening. They had seen countless shows, but none like this. They watched as fans, who moments before had been pushing and shoving to get closer, now sat mesmerized, utterly, still caught in the unique spell. The collective energy in the room had shifted from frenetic excitement to a shared sense of wonder. There was a palpable feeling of community, of being part of something truly special and unique. Strangers made eye contact and exchanged knowing smiles, a silent agreement that they were all witnesses to a miracle. The usual buzz of vendors selling souvenirs and refreshments had quieted. Even the concession lines were shorter, as if people couldn't bear to miss a second even of the break. The very air felt lighter, charged with an almost spiritual resonance, Richard Davies, the music critic, was still scribbling furiously, his notes a chaotic mess of superlatives and half-formed thoughts. He knew his editor wouldn't believe him, unamplified. "Phone's like hyperbole," his editor would reply. But he had to try. He had to convey the sheer impossible magnitude of what had happened. He described the silence, the tears, the raw emotion. He tried to capture the sound, though he knew words would fail. It was like trying to describe the color of pure light to someone who had only ever seen shadows. As the house lights flickered, signaling the end of intermission, a new wave of anticipation rippled through the crowd. But this wasn't the impatient, demanding kind of anticipation. It was a hopeful, almost yearning energy. Everyone wondered, would it happen again? Would he sing like that again? The stage lights came back up a little brighter, illuminating the gleaming instruments. The band members walked back out, taking their places. There was no mic check, no testing of levels. The lead microphone stood center stage, silent, almost like a monument. Collective intake of breath swept through the audience. As Elvis emerged from the wings, he looked different somehow. Still the king, still radiating charisma. But there was a new kind of calm about him, a quiet power. He didn't rush to the microphone. He walked slowly, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, a gentle smile playing on his lips. He picked up the microphone just as before, but he didn't raise it to his mouth. He held it casually in one hand. Then with the other he gestured to the band. Ronnie Tutt started a soft, rolling drum beat. Jerry Sheff laid down a smooth, rhythmic bass line. James Burton's guitar wailed a soulful, bluesy intro. It was Hound Dog, but a version they had never heard before. Slower, bluesier, more raw, stripped of its rock and roll bombast. And then Elvis began to sing. "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog." His voice, unamplified, cut through the arena. It wasn't the blistering, iconic version everyone knew. It was deeper, more guttural, filled with a raw, bluesy anguish. He pushed his voice, letting it resonate from his chest, his diaphragm, his very soul. The power was astonishing. It was the sound of a man bearing his soul, not just a performer singing a song. The silence that had settled over the audience became even more profound. No one screamed, no one shouted. They just listened, completely captivated, completely enthralled. The collective transformation was complete. They had come for the spectacle, for the legend, for the king, but they had found something deeper. They had found the human voice, stripped, bare, raw, and powerful, forging an unbreakable connection. And it was more beautiful, more moving than anything they could have ever imagined. Backstage, the moment Elvis walked off, a collective sigh of relief, followed by a ripple of astonished whispers, went through the crew. "Joe," the stage manager met him with a fresh towel and a bottle of water. "Elvis, man, you were incredible," Joe breathed, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like it. Colonel wants to see you in the dressing room." Elvis nodded, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. His throat was a little raw, but his heart was soaring. He'd pushed his voice further than ever before, and the connection he'd felt with the audience was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It was raw, immediate, and utterly profound. He walked into his dressing room where Colonel Parker sat not on his usual armchair but perched on the edge of a makeup table. A thoughtful expression on his face. He was calm, almost pensive. "Sit down, son," the colonel said, gesturing to the couch. "How do you feel?" "Tired," Elvis admitted, sinking onto the plush couch. "But good. Real good. They heard me, Colonel. They really heard me." The colonel nodded slowly. "They did, boy. They surely did. And not just the front rows. People in the back, the ushers, even Billy, the sound man, they all heard. You clear as a bell." He paused, looking at Elvis with an intensity that made the hair on Elvis's arms stand up. It was a phenomenon, a genuine, honest-to-God phenomenon. Elvis picked at a loose thread on his jumpsuit. "I didn't know I could do that. I just sang. I didn't want to stop the show." "And that, son, is why you're the king," the colonel said, a hint of genuine pride in his voice. "Most fellas, their mic goes out, they'd walk off. You just sang louder. And that Elvis is worth more than all the fancy equipment in the world. The conversation shifted. Colonel Parker, ever the businessman, was already calculating the angles. Billy says he's got the main mic fixed, and he's got a backup ready. He can have you amplified for the second half. Elvis looked up, a flicker of something uncertain in his eyes. You want me to go back to the mic? The colonel leaned forward. Normally, yes. Of course, we sell amplification, we sell spectacle. But tonight was different, wasn't it? He looked at Elvis, then towards the closed door, as if he could still hear the profound silence from the arena. Crowd, son. They weren't screaming. They were listening, every single one of them. I saw tears. I saw awe. He stood up and walked to the mirror, adjusting his tie. We always talk about the magic of Elvis, but tonight, that magic, it wasn't from the wires or the lights, it was from you, from your voice, raw, pure, unadulterated. He turned back to Elvis. This could be a story they tell for generations. The night Elvis sang without a mic and filled the arena. Elvis felt a swell of conflicting emotions, pride certainly, exhilaration, but also a touch of vulnerability. Performing without the safety net of amplification felt incredibly exposed. Every breath, every slight imperfection, every raw emotion laid bare. Yet it was also the most freeing performance of his life. So, what do we do? Elvis asked, his voice low. Billy has the main mic working. He'll put it on your stand. You can use it if you want, but maybe you don't. Maybe we let him see and hear the real magic. Maybe we let him hear the king, just like he was born to sing. He walked over to Elvis and clapped him on the shoulder. It's your call, son, but whatever you decide, they won't forget this night, not ever. Elvis sat there after the colonel left, letting the words sink in. The choice was his. Go back to the familiar amplified sound, the one that had made him a legend, or continue this raw, exposed, intensely personal connection. He thought about Sarah Miller, her tear-streaked face, Martha Perkins, her quiet reverence, the silence, the profound shared silence that had filled the arena after each unamplified song. It wasn't about the showmanship anymore, it was about something deeper, something sacred. He took a deep breath. The raw feeling in his throat was a reminder of the effort, but also of the purity. He knew what he had to do. He stood up, walked to the mirror, and looked at his reflection. Not the costume superstar, but the man beneath the glitter, the singer, the voice. This wasn't just a concert. This was a moment, a chance to show them and himself the true power that lay within. The power that didn't need any wires, any electricity, any amplification, just him and his voice. A knock on the door. Joe peeked in. 5 minutes, Elvis. Are you ready? Elvis turned from the mirror. A determined glint in his eyes, a renewed sense of purpose radiating from him. He walked to the door, a new kind of confidence in his stride. Ready, Joe, he said, his voice firm. Let's give them a show they'll never forget. He knew the microphone was working now. He knew he could pick it up and sing just like he always had. But something told him that tonight the true performance lay in its silence. Tonight the magic would be unplugged and the legend would only grow stronger for it. The house lights dimmed again, plunging the Municipal Auditorium into a deeper darkness than before. A low hum of anticipation, thick and expectant, rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the usual restless energy of a second act. It was charged with a unique, almost reverent curiosity. Everyone was wondering the same thing. What would he do? The band returned to the stage, settling into their places. The spotlight hit the center, and Elvis emerged from the wings bathed in light. He looked out at the silent, waiting audience, and a subtle smile touched his lips. He was carrying the microphone, its chrome gleaming. Collective sigh, almost inaudible, went through the crowd. Would he use it? Would the raw, intimate magic of the first half be gone? He raised his hand to the band, and they launched into a soulful, stripped-down version of Suspicious Minds. The rhythm section, Ronnie Tutt's drums and Jerry Sheff's bass, laid down a powerful but restrained groove. James Burton's guitar sang a mournful, bluesy melody. Elvis brought the microphone to his lips. Sarah Miller felt a jolt of disappointment. It was good, of course. It was Elvis' beauty of his unamplified voice. This felt distant, persisted. The magic had lessened. Martha Perkins sighed softly. "It's not the same, Ethel," she whispered. Ethel Nami Natal. The purity was gone. The spiritual connection felt weaker, diluted by the technology. As Elvis continued the song, he felt it too. The response was there. The usual energy, the swaying bodies, the occasional scream. Profound silence, the collective awe, the deep, unwavering focus from the first half. It was gone. It was replaced by something more superficial. The wall of sound was back, separating him from them, even as it made him louder. He sang the first verse, then the chorus, his movements sharp, his energy high, but his heart wasn't in it the same way. He was performing, yes, but he wasn't connecting on that soul-deep level. He glanced at the sound technicians in the wings. Billy gave him a thumbs up, indicating the mic was perfect. But perfect felt wrong now. He saw it in their faces, too. In the slight shift in their postures, the way their eyes didn't hold that same intense focus. They were enjoying it, certainly. But they weren't mesmerized. They weren't transformed. He knew. The audience knew. The unamplified sound had awakened something in them, something pure and undeniable. And now, going back to the amplified sound felt like a step backward. He finished. Suspicious minds, and the applause was louder than after his unamplified numbers. But it was also more perfunctory, less heartfelt. It was the applause of a satisfied audience, not a moved one. Elvis looked at the microphone in his hand. It felt heavy, a barrier between him and the thousands of souls before him. He remembered the feeling of pushing his voice, straining, but feeling every single person hear him, truly hear him, that direct, unfiltered connection. He made a split-second decision. He moved the microphone away from his lips, holding it down by his side. The band was waiting for his cue for the next song, took a deep breath, and without the aid of any technology, he launched into the opening lines of Heartbreak Hotel. "Well, since my baby left me," his voice, raw and bluesy, filled the arena once more. It wasn't as loud as the amplified version of Suspicious Minds, but it had an immediate, undeniable presence. It was richer, more textured, full of a gritty authenticity that no sound system could rechuck it. A gasp went through the crowd. Then, slowly, just as before, a hush fell over the audience. The conversations died down. The shifting in seats ceased. Heads tilted, eyes widened. Sarah Miller felt a thrill shoot through her. "He's doing it again," she whispered, her voice filled with renewed awe. Martha Perkins closed her eyes, a contented smile on her face. "There it is," she murmured. "There's the magic." The band, quick to react, immediately adjusted their playing. Ronnie Tutt softened his drums. James Burton's guitar became more nuanced, weaving delicate, emotive lines around Elvis's voice. Jerry Chef's bass laid down a mournful, rhythmic foundation. They had learned from the first half, and this time the transition was seamless, instinctive. Elvis moved across the stage, pouring every ounce of his energy into the unamplified performance. He belted out the bluesy lyrics, letting his voice crack with emotion, letting it soar with power, all without the aid of the microphone. He gestured with his hands. His hips swayed, his face contorted with the raw emotion of the song. He wasn't just singing. He was embodying the heartbreak, the loneliness, the very essence of the blues. The audience was captivated. The screams were gone, replaced by an intense collective focus. People leaned forward in their seats, desperate to catch every nuance, every tremor of that incredible voice. They didn't just want to hear him, they needed to feel him, and he was giving it to them, pure and unfiltered. As he finished Heartbreak Hotel, the final, raw note hanging in the air, The silence that followed was even deeper, more powerful than before. It was a silence of profound respect, a collective intake of breath from thousands of souls, utterly moved by the raw, unadorned power of a true artist. And then, as if on cue, a single voice from the back of the arena yelled out clear and strong, "N-O-M-I-C-H-E-M-I-C." A ripple of agreement went through the crowd, not a roar, but a chorus of murmurs, quiet cheers, and heartfelt shouts of, "Yeah, and keep it raw." The audience, having tasted the true pure sound, was demanding more. They didn't want the amplified king. They wanted the authentic, unvarnished Elvis. Elvis stood center stage, a triumphant smile lighting up his face. He looked at the dead microphone in his hand, then out at the sea of eager faces. He didn't need to say a word. Their response had said it all tonight. The king would truly sing, unplugged, unforgettable. The energy in the Municipal Auditorium was electric. It was no longer a concert. It was an extraordinary communion. Elvis stood on stage, the working microphone still clutched in his hand, but held firmly by his side. The audience's plea, "No, Mike, LV," still echoed in the charged air, a testament to the raw connection they now shared. He looked out at them, a powerful wave of emotion washing over him. He had given them the amplified sound, the perfect sound, and they had rejected it. They had chosen the raw, the real, the human. And in that moment, Elvis felt a surge of pride unlike any he had known before. This was what it was all about. Not the fame, not the money, but this profound, soul-deep connection. He nodded to the band. They understood. They had heard the cries from the audience, felt the shift in energy. They were ready. The opening chords of Jailhouse Rock began. But it wasn't the frantic, chaotic version from his films. This was slower, heavier, infused with a bluesy grit. It was still unmistakably Jailhouse Rock, but reimagined, stripped down to its powerful rhythmic core. Elvis launched into the song, his unamplified voice cutting through the arena like a laser. He didn't just sing it, he commanded it. He stomped his foot. His hips swiveled with controlled power. His hands punctuated each line. The raw energy was almost overwhelming. The whole rhythm section was there on the solid rock. His voice filled the space, vibrating in the chests of every single person present. It was loud, yes, but not jarring. It was rich, deep, and utterly compelling. Pushed his vocal cords, pouring out every ounce of his passion, his soul laid bare for thousands to witness. Sarah Miller was on her feet now, not screaming, but swaying to the beat, tears streaming down her face, a radiant smile on her lips. She had never known music could feel like this, could be so profoundly moving. It was a physical experience, a spiritual one. Martha Perkins watched, mesmerized. She closed her eyes for a moment, simply listening to the pure, unadulterated sound. It was like going back in time to a simpler era of music, but with the full power of her perfected voice. It was beautiful beyond words. The band played with a newfound sensitivity, each instrument weaving in and out of Elvis's vocal, supporting it, never overpowering it. James Burton's guitar solos were electrifying but precise, every note deliberate and resonant. Ronnie Tutt's drumming was tight and powerful, yet nuanced, providing the perfect rhythmic foundation. They were no longer just playing, they were breathing with Elvis, following the pulse of his incredible, unamplified voice. Backstage, Colonel Parker stood in the wings, a massive grin on his face. He watched the crowd, saw their rapt attention, their quiet reverence, the emotional tears. He saw the journalists frantically scribbling, the photographers capturing not just Elvis, but the audience's awe. This was it. This was the moment. Billy, the sound engineer, stood beside him, microphone in hand, ready to connect it, but the colonel simply waved him off. "Let him sing, Billy," he whispered, a tremor of emotion in his voice. "Just let him sing." Elvis, moved into Suspicious Minds. Again, unamplified, but this time it felt different. It was the same song he had sung with the mic on earlier, but now, stripped bare, it was filled with raw anguish and yearning. His voice cracked with emotion on certain lines, raw and vulnerable, yet impossibly powerful. It wasn't perfect, not in the studio's sense, but it was profoundly real. He was pouring out his soul, every ounce of his being, into each note. And the audience absorbed it, every single nuance, every raw emotion. The connection was unbreakable. As he finished the song, the applause began. Not a wild roar, but a slow building crescendo of pure, heartfelt appreciation. It was mixed with quiet sobs, whispers of, "Oh my God," and fervent, almost prayerful thank yous. Elvis stood center stage, sweat pouring down his face, his chest heaving. He had given everything, and they had given him something even greater in return. Their complete, unwavering presence, their silent, reverent attention. He knew this was the end of the main set. The audience would usually demand an encore, loud and clear. But tonight they didn't need to shout. Their eyes, their silence, their tears spoke volumes. He took a final deep breath, and without a word he signaled to the band for the ultimate encore. The first unmistakable notes of an American trio filled the arena. Played softly, reverently by the band, Elvis, eyes closed for a moment, began to sing, "Oh, I Wish I Was in Dixie." His voice, unamplified, was a majestic river flowing through the space. It soared, dipped, swelled with patriotic fervor and soulful lament. He wove together the three iconic American songs with a breathtaking, emotional power that was almost unbearable in its raw beauty. The audience was absolutely silent, completely immersed. Many standing now not to cheer, but out of sheer respect. The power of his voice, stripped of all electronic artifice, became a conduit for pure human emotion. It was a collective experience, a shared moment of profound beauty and vulnerability. People held hands. Tears streamed down faces, a quiet understanding passing between strangers. He finished the song, his voice resonating with the final, poignant notes, then fading into the profound stillness. The band's final chords died away, leaving only the memory of his voice hanging in the air like a benediction. For a long, long moment, the arena was utterly silent, then a single sob. Then another. And then a collective standing ovation began, not with a roar, but with a profound emotional swell that built into a thunderous, heartfelt applause. It wasn't for the showman, but for the artist, for the man who had laid his soul bare. Elvis, tears in his own eyes, bowed his head, a gesture of humility and deep gratitude. He knew everyone in that arena knew that they had just witnessed, not just a concert, but a moment that would be etched into the annals of music history. The night the king truly sang, unplugged, and created a legend. The moment Elvis walked off stage, the roaring applause still echoing through the Municipal Auditorium, a profound silence fell over the backstage area. No one rushed forward immediately. Even Colonel Parker stood still, his eyes fixed on the empty stage, a look of almost spiritual awe on his face. Then the dam broke. Joe, the stage manager, was the first to reach Elvis, throwing an arm around his shoulder. "Elvis, my God, that was incredible." The band members followed, their faces alight with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "Man, I've never played like that in my life," Ronnie Tutt exclaimed, shaking his head. "It was like we were all just breathing with you, Elvis." James Burton nodded. "Yeah. Like we were back in a garage, just pure music. No fancy stuff needed." Elvis, breathless and sweat-soaked, felt a wave of profound satisfaction wash over him. His throat was raw, but his heart felt full lighter than it had in years. "They heard me," he whispered, a genuine, humble smile gracing his lips. "They really heard me." Colonel Parker finally moved, clapping Elvis on the back, a rare display of raw emotion from the usually stoic manager. Heard you, son. They didn't just hear you, they felt you. Every single one of them. That was worth $1 million. Maybe two. History. Boy, history. The screams of adoration died. Reproaching Tavern. Tears flowed freely. We didn't just witness a performer, we witnessed a force of nature. This was not a show. It was an awakening. The magic of Elvis, unamplified, is more potent than any sound system could ever hope to deliver. Phone lines lit up across the country. Stories of the unplugged Elvis concert spread like wildfire. Fans who had been there recounted the experience with almost spiritual fervor. Those who hadn't been there felt a pang of regret, a sense of having missed a once-in-a-lifetime event for Elvis. The experience was continued to perform with amplification, of course, but something had fundamentally shifted. He approached each concert with a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper connection to the pure act of singing. He became more aware of the nuances of his voice, the power it held even without the aid of technology. He often found himself holding the microphone away from his lips during quieter moments, letting his raw voice shine through a subtle nod to that magical night. He spoke about it in interviews, sometimes with a touch of wonder in his voice. "It was like everything got stripped away," he once said. "Just me and them and the music. No tricks, no fancy stuff, just pure feeling." It was the most honest I'd ever felt on stage. The Municipal Auditorium concert became a cornerstone of his legend. It was cited as proof of his unparalleled vocal ability, a testament to a talent so immense it defied the laws of physics. It solidified his reputation, not just as a showman, but as a truly gifted vocalist. For the audience members, the memory became a cherished personal treasure. Sarah Miller went on to become a music teacher, always telling her students about the night she heard Elvis's voice fill an arena without a microphone, urging them to find the pure sound in their own music. Martha Perkins kept a framed newspaper clipping of the event on her mantelpiece, a quiet reminder of a moment that had touched her soul. The event lingered a whispered legend, a story passed down through generations of fans. It reminded everyone that true artistry doesn't rely on technology or spectacle, but on the raw, undeniable power of human talent and connection. And though Elvis would continue to command stages around the world with his amplified voice and dazzling persona, for those who were there on that unforgettable July night in 1970, the true sound of the king, the one that filled an entire arena, without a single wire, remained the most powerful, the most heartwarming. It was the night the microphone cut out, and Elvis Presley's voice didn't just fill an arena. It filled the hearts of thousands forever.